torture. It was torturing African Americans. And I'm sure they got a call from the Justice Department, because when you bring the United Nations in, you are really focusing on the United States, not just Chicago. And so when the United Nations, in their concluding observations, is what they call them, they mention Abu Ghraib, Guantanamo Bay, and Chicago, all in the same breath. They call, and I'm sure they tell them, look, do something about this stuff in Chicago. And we get a call within months. And not long after that, John Burge gets indicted.
A judge sentences former police commander John Burge to 4.5 years in prison for lying about the torture of suspects. And while that is twice as long as recommended according to federal guidelines, some victims describe it as a slap on the wrist.
I personally believe that if it wasn't for all of the organizing and activism we've done here locally, as well as going to the United Nations, we would not be here today. Burge being both convicted and sentenced to a crime of imprisonment for the heinous international human rights violations he committed and engaging in systemic torture.
There have been a hardcore of dedicated activists, Mary Powers, chief among them, who've grown gray in their efforts on this. But civil society, on the whole, has been disengaged. God knows there are lawyers here tonight, and others who aren't, who've beaten their heads against the wall for decades now. I don't know how they keep doing it. And they and those activists belong in some Chicago Hall of Fame.
Of course, this scandal has gone on now since 1972, which makes it almost a 40-year scandal. Remarkable police misconduct isn't quite serious enough a word. It's a human rights scandal of unprecedented nature here in the city or in this country.
The fact that John Burge is indicted and the fact that he's in prison is not sufficient. If our movement that Mary, of course, helped organize around police, if our movement sits back and celebrates at this point that we finally got him and stopped doing the work, nothing to happen. It's not enough. This should inspire the movement to work harder. It should inspire the movement to work harder, because we could say, okay, we got him, but let's get the rest of them. And if other people in other parts of the country do that, then the John Burge is just one hurdle that we've overcome. Because when you think about it in the broader scheme of things, they got one guy. There were dozens of these officers. They tortured perhaps close to 200 men. And not only did they torture them, many people knew about it.
Because you can't tell the John Burge story without telling about Richard Daley's involvement in it. As I alluded to earlier, Richard Daley was the state's attorney of Cook County in 1982 when it was first exposed that John Burge was at the center of a torture scandal. Because if Daley had indicted Burge in 1982, if Richard Brezek, the police superintendent, had fired Burge in 1982, then we wouldn't have to have had an Al Capone type of trial. But of course, Daley did nothing of the sort. That also led to the torture of 75 or 80 additional men.
And what's unusual about this lawsuit is a recent ruling allowing Daley to remain as a defendant and be sued for his alleged involvement in the case, both as state's attorney and the mayor.
He should have at that time investigated, he should have prosecuted, and if he had, Michael Tillman never would have been arrested, falsely charged, and falsely convicted or tortured.
And I think, in fact, the fact that Daley now is going to be included in a civil suit as a defendant is a great victory, and I'm glad we're all elated. But again, it's just another battle. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't know what a jury will do with it.
Former Mayor Richard Daley will not testify under oath this week about his involvement in a high-profile police brutality case. Daley was supposed to give a deposition for a lawsuit filed by former inmate Michael Tillman that involves former Chicago Police Lieutenant John Burge. Well, now this deposition is on hold.
We have to win the war. We have to win the war against institutional racism, particularly in the criminal justice system. There's no two ways about it.
Is torture ever right? Is torture ever something that should be countenanced in a society such as ours, under a constitution, under human rights principles? And of course, the answer to that is no. Torture is never right. Torture should never be countenanced. It's always a human rights violation. So until the city of Chicago deals with this issue, and the changing of the guard deals with this issue, we'll never be able to cleanse the conscience of the city of Chicago about these horrific crimes and this horrific scandal.
Last in the courtroom, the judge, I explained it to the judge what had happened. I testified against Burge, and I told him what he did to me. The jury believed me. They found Burge guilty, which is a good thing. But the sad part was I had to live it all over again, as I'm doing now, as I do every night, every day.
I mean, here again, you can describe it, but until you actually live it and been through it, I used to try and imagine how black people felt in Mississippi and Alabama back in the days when the Klan used to terrorize them. And I really couldn't get a good feel for what they must have felt. But November the 2nd, 1983, allowed me to get a very good feeling.
But I tell people all the time, just go home, do some push-ups, and come back out and start struggling all over again. Because I'm not going to stop.
We're glad you've been with us for this special edition of Sanctuary from the documentary To Turn a Blind Eye on Justice for Survivors of Police Torture, produced by Jackie Reve River and John Lyons for Peace Productions. Your thoughts and reactions to issues and ideas at the intersection of life and faith are important to us, and we want to hear from you. Let us know what you think about the stories of police torture you have just seen and what you will do to make a difference for justice as a matter of faith. write to us at Sanctuary in care of the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries, 126 East Chestnut, Chicago 60611. That's the Greater Chicago Broadcast Ministries, 126 East Chestnut, Chicago 60611. And you can email us at gcbm@ameritech.net and visit our website at gcbm.org. I'm Lydia Talbot. Thanks for keeping faith with us today on Sanctuary. May peace be with you.